I've never been a big fan of parties, but being a college student, I've learned to go to a few, even if I'm not in the mood. One of my friends, Ryan, was hosting a New Year's Eve party at his house, and since I hadn't seen him in a while, I decided to go. I thought it would be a good way to kick off the year, maybe meet some new people, and just relax. Ryan is the type of guy who invites a ton of people from different social circles, which always makes things interesting. So, when I walked in, there were people I knew, but also a lot I didn't. The house was huge and it was packed with people. The music was loud, everyone was laughing, and I immediately got a drink from the kitchen. I was trying to make my way to a corner of the room to just chill when I noticed Megan, a girl I'd met a few times before. We started talking, and it felt nice to catch up. But as we were talking, I noticed someone across the room, a man I didn't recognize. He was standing by the doorway, just staring at me. At first, I thought maybe I just didn't know him, or maybe he was drunk and had a strange way of looking at people. But the thing is, he didn't stop staring. I'd look away, try to focus on the conversation with Megan, but every time I looked up, there he was, still watching me. It felt weird, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was probably just overthinking it. Maybe he was just one of those guys who was socially awkward or whatever. As the night went on, I started to feel more uncomfortable. The man didn't just stare anymore. He started following me around the room. Every time I moved, he seemed to position himself somewhere else just to keep his eyes on me. It was subtle at first, like he wasn't doing it on purpose, but I could tell. It was like I couldn't escape him. Megan noticed me getting tense and she asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just a little tired from the crowd. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but something about the way this guy was watching me was disturbing. Eventually, Megan and I decided to step outside for a cigarette, hoping to get some fresh air and talk without all the noise. But as we stepped out into the backyard, I saw the man again, standing by the back door, looking right at us. He wasn't just standing there like he had before. He was now moving, slowly following us. My stomach dropped. I tried to play it cool and act like it wasn't a big deal, but Megan could tell I was on edge. We didn't even finish our cigarettes. I told her we should go back inside. The man was still there, watching us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was threatening. We went back inside and told Ryan about the guy, but honestly, no one seemed to take us seriously. Ryan laughed it off and said that the guy was probably just trying to make some new friends. Everyone else was either too drunk to care or just didn't want to ruin the vibe of the party. I tried to forget about it, but it wasn't easy. I kept glancing around the room, trying to figure out where the guy was. It felt like he was everywhere, and every time I tried to talk to someone, he'd show up in my peripheral vision, standing across the room, staring. His eyes never left me. By now, I was starting to panic. I knew I had to get out of there. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. I needed to lose him. I decided to leave the party for a while and just walk around the house to clear my head. The house was huge, with a staircase that led upstairs and a basement that was dark and creepy. I figured if I walked around long enough, I could lose the guy and give myself some space. I started walking faster, trying to put more distance between myself and whoever this man was. I treated that house like it was a maze at that point. After a while, I thought I'd finally managed to shake him off. I didn't see him anymore, and I felt more calm. I figured I could finally get some peace. But that peace didn't last. I decided it was time to go. Megan already left, and she was the only one who tried to help. I didn't want to deal with the weirdness anymore. I was tired, and it felt like the night had just taken a strange turn. I grabbed my jacket, said goodbye to everyone, and started heading for the door. But as I stepped outside, ready to leave, something stopped me in my tracks. There he was again. The man. He was standing across the street, just staring at me. We locked eyes. I don't know how long we stood there like that, but it felt like an eternity. I was too far away to do anything, too far away to yell. I knew not to ask for help, since no one at the party would care to help. I knew if I had called the police, everyone would be mad that I ruined the party. Plus, I don't think the cops would have done anything anyways. It was hard to even think clearly. All I could do was stare back at him. Then, after what felt like a long time, I quickly got in my car, started it up, and pulled out of the driveway, hoping to get away from this strange, unsettling encounter. But as I was driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw him again. He was standing at the end of the driveway, just watching me. I drove a little further, hoping he'd just turn around and go back inside. But that didn't happen. There was a red light, so I had to stop and watch this man continue to stare at me. Then suddenly the man sprinted to my car fast. I pushed on the gas and ran the red light. Luckily, I didn't hit any cars or get hit. I didn't see him again after that. Not for the rest of the drive, but I was waiting for him to pop out of nowhere throughout the rest of the night. The next day, I spoke to Ryan about the strange man at the party, but as I was about to give him the details, he cut me off. Apparently, the man was someone who had escaped from prison. He has a history of stalking people to eventually kill them. And a while after I left, the police shut down the party because they found him there and arrested him. I learned to always trust my gut when something doesn't feel right, because sometimes, when you feel like someone's watching you, it's not just in your head. I'm not a writer, and I never thought I'd be telling this story to anyone, but here I am. So, let me start from the beginning. My name's Ronald, and I've known Joey since we were kids. Our families used to live in the same neighborhood, and we spent pretty much every day together. As we got older, life pulled us in different directions, but whenever we could, we'd try to get together, grab a beer, and talk about old times. Joey and his girlfriend Ivy had been planning this New Year's getaway to a cabin in the woods for months, and they invited me to come along. It was supposed to be just a quiet, peaceful trip to ring in the new year. No distractions, no worries. But things went south faster than I could have imagined. We drove out to this remote cabin, which was about 3 hours outside of town. The place was exactly what you'd picture. A small, rustic cabin tucked deep in the woods with no neighbors for miles. The kind of place where you wouldn't have to deal with any outside noise, no traffic, no distractions. Just nature, some drinks, and a little bit of New Year's Eve fun. At first, it was great. We unpacked, got the fire going, and set up everything for the night. We spent a few hours talking and joking around, playing some cards, and just catching up. The place had that old, creaky charm. The kind of charm that only a place that's seen a lot of years and not a lot of maintenance can have. I guess that's part of what made it so perfect for us. We were away from everything. But as the night went on, things started going left. It was around 10 p.m. when I got the first message. We were sitting in the living room, just finishing a round of drinks, when my phone buzzed. I wasn't expecting anything important. I mean, we were out in the middle of nowhere, so I figured it was probably spam or a sales ad, but when I looked, I saw it was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. "I'm watching you." That's all it said. Just those 3 words. I laughed at first. I thought it was a prank, maybe one of my old buddies messing with me. Joey and Ivy didn't seem to think much of it either. Joey shrugged it off and went back to flipping through some music on his phone. Then, a second text came through a few minutes later, this time sent to Joey. "You're not alone." It was even weirder than the first. Now, I was starting to get a little paranoid, but Joey didn't seem worried. He just made a joke about how maybe we had some ghosts in the woods watching us. Ivy laughed too, but I could tell she wasn't as comfortable as she was before. At 11 p.m., another message came through, this time to Ivy. "It's almost time." That's when things started to get a little more tense. Ivy had a serious look on her face. I could tell she didn't like it. I didn't like it either, but I wasn't about to let it ruin the night. We all kind of joked it off as some sort of weird coincidence since Joey did say some of his friends knew we would be at that place. We moved on, trying to act like everything was normal. But as midnight approached, the messages kept coming. Each one more chilling than the last. "You can't leave. We're waiting. It's happening." We started trying to joke around again, but it wasn't funny anymore. Joey looked out the window, his face going from a relaxed smile to something else. I couldn't quite tell what it was, but I knew he wasn't laughing anymore. I remember looking down at my phone again. Another message, this time just as the clock hit 11:55. It was from the same anonymous number. "It's time." Suddenly the lights flickered, then everything went out. The entire cabin went black. I heard Ivy gasp, and I could hear her moving around, trying to find her phone for the flashlight. Joey was swearing under his breath. I pulled mine out and tried to turn on the flashlight. The whole place was dead silent, except for the occasional crack of the fire in the hearth. Joey said someone must have messed with the fuse box. He was upset and kept rambling about how this had better be a prank, but I wasn't so sure. Then, we heard a crash from one of the rooms, a loud sound, like something heavy had been thrown to the floor. I felt my heart jump. I asked Joey and Ivy what they think it could have been. Joey said he didn't know, but we needed to check it out. I was really hesitant to get close to the noise. I mentioned to Joey that whatever was causing it was definitely something I didn't want to witness. Ivy tried to call the police, but unfortunately, there was no service anymore. Even if there had been, I wasn't quite sure what we would tell them. We all huddled in the living room, trying to figure out what to do. That's when I realized if Ivy didn't have any service, then none of us had service. It didn't make sense though. The cabin wasn't that remote, but there was no signal. Ivy looked out the window and whispered to us that she saw someone run past the window. Joey tried to comfort her. He said it was probably some animal and to not worry about it, but I could tell he was lying. I told him to be real with himself, that it was obviously someone trying to scare us, but I didn't know how far they were willing to go to do so. I insisted that we just make a run for it because someone could be trying to kill us. Joey yanked on my arm, telling me not to go to the extreme. I stared at the front door, wondering if whoever was out there had been the one sending those texts, or if they'd been watching us the whole time. Then, just as I was about to leave without them, I heard the noise again. This time, it was louder, glass shattering, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. I could hear them moving closer, slow but deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hide anymore. I told Joey that we needed to leave now because someone was inside, just as much as they were outside. We ran for the door and practically jumped out of the house. But as soon as we got outside into the car, we realized all the tires were slashed. When I turned, I pulled on Joey to turn around with me. Two men, dressed entirely in black, with masks covering their faces. One was in the doorway of the front door, and the other at the bottom of the porch steps. They didn't move at first, but then they began walking toward us slowly. They weren't in any hurry. They knew they had us cornered. I whispered to Joey and Ivy that we should run. Then the three of us bolted into the woods. We didn't even look back, not until we finally broke through the trees and found ourselves at the edge of a small road. A semi-truck was passing by. We waved our arms like crazy, desperate for help. The driver pulled over. We jumped into the truck, shaking and barely able to catch our breath. When we turned to look behind us, the two men had stopped. They were just standing there, staring at us. Slowly, they turned and walked back into the woods. The truck driver took us straight to town. He didn't ask many questions, just dropped us off at a gas station. I'm pretty sure he didn't want to know what had happened, and I didn't blame him. The following morning, we returned to the cabin with the police since our belongings were still there. To our surprise, the police searched the place but didn't discover anything unusual. There were no signs of forced entry, and it seemed like no one had been there besides us. We didn't know if it was some kind of prank, if they were just messing with our heads, or if someone was actually out there in the woods watching us. But whatever it was, we didn't stick around to find out. We got our things and left. The whole drive back to Joey's house, we didn't say a word. We didn't have to. We all felt it. There's no way I'll ever forget that night. I don't know if it was a prank or something else entirely, but I don't think any of us are ever going to go back to that cabin. And I'm pretty sure we all learned that some things are better left in the past. I've had this nightmare every single New Year's Eve for the past 5 years. It always starts the same way. I'm in a house, but it's never a place I recognize. I'm trapped in a room with a stranger. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a long coat. He doesn't speak to me, doesn't even look at me, but I can feel his presence. It's like he's just waiting for something, or maybe waiting for me to do something. There's this thick silence, and I feel completely helpless. As the night goes on, I can't move. It's like my feet are glued to the floor. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. Then, as midnight approaches, everything changes. The air grows colder. The clock ticks louder, like it's echoing in my head. And right at midnight, when the world is supposed to be celebrating the new year, he turns. His face distorts, his body contorts into something monstrous. His skin stretches and ripples, his eyes go black, and his mouth opens wider than it should. It's like he's swallowing the whole room, or swallowing me. I always wake up in a panic, gasping for breath. It's the same every year. Same nightmare, same ending, same suffocating terror. But no matter what, I always wake up safe and alive. That was until this year. It started just like every other New Year's Eve. I had spent the day alone, quietly reflecting on the past year. I've never been the type to throw big parties or go out for a celebration, so I usually just stay home. As midnight drew near, I started to feel that familiar feeling. It was like my body knew something was coming. I tried to shake it off, and trying to convince myself that it was just nerves from anticipating the same old nightmare. I decided to get in bed early, to try to fall asleep before the clock struck 12. The idea of the nightmare coming again terrified me, but I wanted to get it over with. I tried to block out the thoughts, closed my eyes, and drifted into sleep. But then, just like every other year, I found myself in that house again. I was trapped in the room with him again. I could feel his presence even before I opened my eyes. I didn't want to look at him, didn't want to acknowledge him, but there he was. Standing by the window, staring outside as the clock ticked down to midnight. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't budge. I was frozen in place, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. My skin felt clammy, and I couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, I tried to ask him who he was, or why he was there, but it felt like it was impossible to speak. And what made it worse this time was that I was aware that I was in the dream. It's hard to explain, but the best way to put it is like living the dream, as if I wasn't dreaming, like it was real life. But it wasn't. The clock struck 11. Then, 11:30. My pulse quickened. I knew what was coming. I knew the way the nightmare would unfold like it always did. At midnight, as the clock told 12, I felt that familiar chill. The air in the room dropped in temperature, and I could feel the shift. I could hear the faintest noise from outside the room. A creak. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, as if someone was approaching my bedroom door. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to move again, but it was no use. My body wouldn't respond. The stranger at the window started to turn slowly, but instead of his usual monstrous transformation, there was nothing. He was just standing there, facing me now, his eyes fixed on mine. He didn't change, not like he did in the past. Then the door creaked. I didn't know why, but I couldn't look away from him. He was looking at me, really looking at me for the first time. His eyes were dark, like black pools that sucked everything in. I could hear the footsteps again, but they weren't coming from inside the dream. They were coming from the hallway of my apartment, slowly and steadily. The nightmare wasn't just a dream this time. There was someone outside my door. I tried to force myself to wake up, but it wasn't happening. My eyes stayed on the stranger, now so close to me. The clock struck 12:30. The figure outside my door was getting closer. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, and the terror was slowly smothering me. I could hear the steps getting closer now. My pulse was so loud in my ears that it drowned out everything else. Then the door handle turned. I had no idea how, but somehow I managed to push myself up from the bed and woke up. I stumbled out of the bed with my legs shaking and dripping with sweat. The room seemed to stretch farther with every step I took toward the door. Each footstep I made felt like it was echoing in my head. The door hadn't opened yet. I stood there for a while waiting for the door to open, but it didn't. I knew it was waiting for me, and by now I was ready to get out of my apartment, and I also knew the only way out was opening the door. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle and flung the door open. And that's when I saw him, the stranger. He was standing there, in the hallway, outside my door. His figure was tall, just like in my nightmare, the twisted grin, the hollow dark eyes, and his skin, it was pale and stretched, almost translucent, like something that didn't belong in this world. But there was something else. A deep guttural growl emanated from his throat. His lips twisted in a smile. There was no other escape. The fear that had paralyzed me all those years, now it was real. This was no nightmare. This thing had come for me. The creature in front of me lunged forward, its hand reaching for my throat. I jumped back into my room and slammed my door. The handle was twisting, and the thing was banging on the door. Then it stopped. I opened the door, and nothing was there. With every ounce of courage I had, knowing he could be out there, and I ran toward the door of my apartment. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I knew that if I did, it would catch me. When I reached the front door, I threw it open and ran outside, not looking back once. I didn't care where I was going, as long as I was away from that thing. I kept running until I made it to my friend's apartment a few blocks down. I told her and anyone else who will listen, but they all look at me like I am crazy. They don't say I am, but I can tell that's what they're thinking. The nightmares don't come anymore. The stranger, the monster, or whatever you want to call that thing, hasn't appeared since that night. Maybe that was the end of it. Or maybe it's just waiting for next year when the clock strikes midnight.